April 14th, 1912. On a freezing night in the North Atlantic, the largest and most luxurious ship ever built was sailing through the darkness. It was called the Titanic. People believed it was unsinkable, and newspapers called it a miracle of modern engineering. The richest people in the world were on board, along with immigrants chasing a better life. But within just a few hours, over 1,500 people would be dead. More than a century later, people are still asking the same question. How could the greatest ship ever built disappear in a single night? To understand what happened, we need to go back to the beginning. At the start of the 20th century, huge shipping companies were competing to dominate the Atlantic Ocean. One company, White Star Line, wanted to create something the world had never seen before. A ship bigger, more luxurious, and more impressive than anything that existed. Construction began in Belfast, Ireland in 1909. Thousands of workers spent years building what many believed was the future of travel. The ship measured almost 270 meters long and included swimming pools, restaurants, gyms, libraries, and even elevators. For first-class passengers, life on the Titanic felt like living inside a palace, while thousands of immigrants in third class dreamed of starting a new life in America. On April 10th, 1912, the Titanic left Southampton, England. Crowds gathered to witness history. Families smiled and waved goodbye, unaware that this voyage would become one of the most famous tragedies ever. The ship stopped in France and Ireland before heading toward New York City. Everything seemed perfect. Passengers enjoyed music, fine food, and beautiful rooms while children played and people admired the endless ocean. Captain Edward Smith, one of the most experienced captains in the world, was commanding what would be his final voyage before retirement. But during the journey, warnings began to arrive. Other ships reported dangerous ice fields ahead. Message after message warned about icebergs, yet the Titanic continued at nearly full speed. Nobody imagined that disaster was only hours away. On the night of April 14th, the sea was unusually calm. There were no waves, and the sky was clear, but the absence of moonlight made it difficult to spot danger. At 11:40 p.m., two lookouts saw an iceberg directly ahead. They rang the warning bell, and the bridge ordered the ship to turn and reverse engines, but it was too late. The iceberg scraped along the side of the ship, damaging several compartments below the waterline. Water rushed inside. Thomas Andrews, the ship's designer, inspected the damage and reached a devastating conclusion. The Titanic would sink, and it would sink within hours. Captain Smith could hardly believe it. Orders were given to prepare the lifeboats, but there was one terrible problem. There were not enough. More than 2,200 people were on board, but the lifeboats could hold only about half that number. At first, many passengers refused to leave because the ship still seemed safe. Some lifeboats even departed half empty. Meanwhile, the band continued playing music while crew members tried to keep everyone calm. Women and children were given priority and families were separated, believing they would reunite soon. They were wrong. As time passed, panic spread. The front of the ship sank deeper into the water. People rushed toward the lifeboats, but there were not enough spaces. Distress rockets lit up the sky, yet nearby ships failed to understand their meaning. Far away, the RMS Carpathia received the emergency signal and changed course immediately, but it was still hours away. Back on the Titanic, chaos ruled. The decks tilted, furniture slid across the floor, and passengers struggled to stay upright. Some prayed, some cried, and others accepted their fate. Even as death approached, the musicians continued playing. At around 2:20 a.m., after less than 3 hours, the impossible happened. The Titanic vanished beneath the sea. thousands of people were thrown into freezing water. Most died within minutes. Survivors would later describe the screams in the darkness as something they could never forget. Eventually, silence returned to the ocean. Hours later, the Carpathia arrived and rescued the survivors. Only around 700 people remained alive. More than 1,500 had perished. Investigations later revealed terrible mistakes. Not enough lifeboats, ignored warnings, excessive speed, and poor communication. The disaster changed maritime safety forever. New laws required enough lifeboats for everyone. Radio operators had to remain on duty around the clock, and ice patrols were established in the Atlantic. But the story was far from over. For decades, the wreck remained lost. Then, in 1985, explorer Robert Ballard discovered it nearly 4 kilometers below the surface. The world was amazed. The ship had broken into 2 pieces, and personal belongings still rested in the darkness. Even today, scientists continue studying the wreck, but bacteria are slowly destroying it. One day, the Titanic may disappear forever, yet its story will never be forgotten. The Titanic represented human ambition and the belief that technology could conquer nature. But on that cold night in April 1912, nature proved otherwise. More than a century later, books, movies, documentaries, and endless questions keep the story alive. Could more lives have been saved? Could the collision have been avoided? Perhaps we will never know. But one thing is certain. The Titanic was supposed to be unsinkable. And yet, in just a few hours, the greatest ship on Earth became one of history's greatest tragedies. That is why, more than 100 years later, the world still remembers the Titanic